On the day I turned 29, my parents let themselves into my apartment the way someone opens a cupboard, automatic, thoughtless, like the space could never belong to me. They dropped a folder onto my table as if it were an overdue invoice. My father chuckled first, low and satisfied, the kind of laugh that settles into every corner of a room. My mother didn't even bother with a greeting. She tapped the folder with 2 fingers and announced that my sister's future was now taken care of. Behind them, the candle on my birthday cake burned down to nothing. Neither of them noticed. I didn't protest. I didn't ask a single question out loud. I only wondered quietly and privately how long it would take them to realize they had taken something that wasn't actually mine to lose. Silence had been my native language growing up. Our house always sounded busy, but never with anything that belonged to me. Grace's piano lessons drifting down the hall, my mother's shouts of praise from the kitchen, my father's booming voice mapping out her future step by step. I learned to move around their noise without disturbing it, a shadow carefully avoiding the spotlight that never once touched me. Money was the first thing they ever claimed without permission. I was 17 when my father borrowed everything I had saved from my part-time job. He stood in the doorway jingling his keys, saying it was for something important. He never explained what the important thing was. My mother told me families shared everything. Grace appeared in a new dress that same week. I connected the dots alone. By the time I turned 20, I had learned to keep my celebrations small, quiet, and easy to ignore. When I earned my first certification in data security, my father skimmed the document and asked if that meant I could finally fix his password issues. My mother changed the subject to Grace's internship before I even finished speaking. That night at dinner there was only one story worth telling, and it wasn't mine. So I worked quietly, steadily, relentlessly. I stayed late at the office. I picked up freelance contracts even when my body begged for sleep. I turned down every social invitation that cost more than it offered. Instead of keeping a diary, I watched numbers in a savings account rise one careful deposit at a time. My 20s were a blur of spreadsheets and taped windows in a cramped studio with thin walls and a rattling heater. But each month I added what I could. 100, 300, 1,000 if I caught a lucky break. The money collected slowly, imperfectly, like rain gathering in a cracked bowl. What mattered wasn't the amount. It was that it was mine, untouched, unshared. Proof, however quiet, that I existed in ways my family didn't recognize. But every year came a new reminder of my place. Grace's graduation celebration lasted a week. Mine ended before the cake softened. When she landed her first job, the relatives toasted her as if she'd invented ambition. When I received a promotion, my father handed me a list of bills he needed me to cover just this month. My mother smiled the soft, pitying smile reserved for children who don't know better and said I didn't mind helping. Everyone nodded, assuming I existed to make things easier, not because they had ever asked. 6 years ago, after finishing a major project that should have changed the direction of my life, I walked into my parents' living room expecting, maybe even hoping for a moment of acknowledgement. Instead, they were caught up in a conversation about Grace's newest dream. I stood there holding my folder like an intruder who had wandered into the wrong house. That was the day I understood the truth. I wasn't a star or a supporting role. I was a resource, and resources weren't appreciated. They were used. So when my father slid that folder across my kitchen table, I recognized the gesture. The edges were softened from being handled too many times. My mother inspected my apartment like a hotel room she had no intention of spending the night in. I opened the folder slowly, because stillness was the only thing I trusted myself not to fail at. The first page was a withdrawal confirmation. The number at the bottom was so clean, so final, that my brain hesitated to attach reality to it. $2,900,000. 10 years of extra hours. 10 years of skipped holidays, weekend jobs, bonuses divided like rations. All of it gone with one signature. My father let out another one of his victorious little laughs. "Thanks," he said, tapping the page. "Your money secured your sister's future." My mother adjusted her sleeve. "You would have wasted it anyway." She didn't sound angry, just certain. Something in me went still. Not broken, not angry, just still. As if a gear had stopped turning after grinding far too long. Grace wasn't in the room, but her name echoed in everything they said. Her future. Her needs. Her path. Mine didn't come up at all. I set my hand down slowly, like I was placing something fragile that no longer belonged to me. They kept talking, plans, schedules, renovations Grace wanted for her business, some dinner they expected me to attend. Their voices moved around me the way sound moves around furniture. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. Those were the reflexes of a version of me they had shaped so thoroughly that it almost felt natural. Instead, I let silence settle. Heavier this time, chosen instead of inherited. Then I did something they never imagined I could do. I laughed. Softly. A quiet breath turned into a sound they mistook as acceptance. But it wasn't acceptance. It was recognition. Because the money they drained wasn't my real savings. They'd emptied the account they knew about. The one I'd let them see just long enough for them to believe they understood the shape of my life. Long enough for their confidence to turn into carelessness. They had taken what they thought was everything. They had no idea what I'd kept. The night had always been my ally. Steady, muted, uncomplicated. No one ever really grasped the way I planned things. Years ago, long after everyone else had gone home, I sat in my office and built a second financial profile. A shadow account that mimicked my real saving habits. I fed it regular deposits, predictable amounts, a rhythm believable enough to blend in with the life I lived publicly. But that account was never meant to hold value. Its purpose was to attract the wrong touch. The morning after my birthday, the apartment had returned to its usual stillness. The folder my father shoved across my table the night before remained exactly where he'd left it, a corner bent at the place my thumb had pressed. I brewed coffee, watched the steam drift upward, and placed the mug beside my laptop, my grounding ritual. Then I opened my logs. Every transfer into that decoy account was cataloged. Timestamps, notes, a neatly colored column marking expected patterns. I knew precisely when an abnormal withdrawal would trip the automated safeguards built into the system I once helped design. The alerts had been active from the moment someone touched the funds. My actual money, the real accumulation of my life, was kept in a separate place, to them invisible. I scrolled through the audit trail I'd constructed. The mirrored deposits, the balance totals, the intentional absence of any real-world expenses. The account looked almost too clean, which was exactly the point. They had taken something crafted to look like everything I'd earned, unaware that it was designed for this very moment. I sent one short message to my attorney. They accessed the monitored account. His reply came almost instantly. Proceed. No discussion needed, we'd practiced this exact exchange. Closing the conversation, I opened another directory labeled in an unobtrusive way. Inside were years of documentation. Statements, transfers, archived emails, and snapshots of balances. The full picture of what I'd actually saved. I added the newest screenshot, the decoy drained to zero, and watched the cursor blink in the middle of an empty cell before closing the file. The next step was easier than I expected. I opened my banking app and removed my parents from every recurring payment I'd been covering for them. Things they once convinced me were temporary favors. Insurance. Utilities. Their so-called emergency fund. I canceled each one individually, each confirmation a soft click of finality. It was the quietest line I had ever drawn. Afterward, I opened my notebook and made a list, not of debts they owed me, but of obligations I no longer carried. It was a shorter list than I imagined. I crossed off the final line with one clean stroke. At work, the office lights hummed in their usual dull way. That afternoon, Noah passed by my desk, balancing his lunch and some reports. He glanced at me, then at my screen and gave a small nod, as if he sensed some slight shift in my posture. I returned it without a word. I spent the rest of the day reviewing a proposal for a new contract, combing through its security requirements and access plans. My mind felt precise, sharper than it had in years. When the office quieted, I opened a folder of personal ideas I'd been compiling, concepts for my own projects, the sort I'd never shared with my parents because they would have dismissed them as naive. I reread every line with a calm, steady clarity. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my dining table. The folder my parents had brought over still rested nearby. I ignored it. Instead, I opened the actual account holding my savings, untouched and secure. I let the sight of the balance anchor me. Then I reviewed my files once more. The monitoring logs, the trigger points, the index of discrepancies their actions would raise with investigators. Everything was unfolding exactly as intended. I felt no fury, no shaking anger. Just a deep stillness formed from years of being underestimated. Silence had been their weapon. I had learned to use it with precision. I closed the folder softly. The candle from yesterday's cake lay on the counter, its wax bent sideways. I picked it up, examined its slight deformity, then set it down again. I wasn't going to repair what they broke. The first alert arrived the next morning as I poured my coffee. A faint buzz on the counter, the phone lighting up with a notice from the bank. Suspicious activity detected. I stared at it, the warmth of the mug brushing my face like a reminder to inhale. Then my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. His voice hit me the moment I answered. "What did you do, Ruby?" "The bank froze everything. All the accounts. They're telling us there's an investigation." I leaned against the counter, watching sunlight crawl across the floor. "I got an alert too," I said evenly. "Looks like a routine fraud check." "Don't play with me," he snapped. "What is going on?" I held the phone, calm, listening to the panic in his voice, something he had never expected to feel because of me. They suspected us of funneling funds. Every transfer came under scrutiny. Questions about recurring patterns surfaced. Patterns, the very ones I had meticulously built the snare around. My response was cut off by my mother's frantic voice cracking through the speaker. "Fix this," she demanded. "You're tarnishing our name. Grace is crying. Your father can't even breathe." I lifted my cup slowly, letting the liquid warm my hands. "You mean the future? The money I supposedly secured?" Silence hung heavy, sealing the conversation like a door snapping shut. I ended the call and opened my inbox. Another alert, this time from a federal compliance office. An account flagged. Under review. Not mine. My parents'. Another ping followed, a message from my lawyer. They had activated a full audit. Stand by. After that, everything moved methodically like dominoes long set in precise order. By noon, my parents had called repeatedly. Grace twice. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on a contract draft at my desk, carefully marking sections that needed clarity. My hand stayed steady, my pulse remained calm. Later that evening, the news ran a brief segment. A local couple under investigation for financial misconduct. The cameras caught my parents outside their home. My father argued with someone just out of frame. My mother hid her face from reporters' questions. They mirrored the arrogance they had once shown in my apartment, only now their certainty was gone. I watched quietly, letting their voices fade into the room's dim glow. The next morning brought chaos. A harsh knock rattled my door. My mother appeared first, disheveled and anxious, pressing past me before I could speak. "Ruby, listen to me," she said, pacing like a caged animal. Investigators had come to the house, questioning missing wire transfers and statements. "Your father nearly fainted. This can't be happening." "Not to us." I leaned on the counter, the same spot I had stood when they'd taken everything. My voice remained steady. "I warned you not to touch what wasn't yours." Her face froze. "We're your parents. Everything we did was for the family. For Grace." I corrected her gently. "For Grace." Her eyes shimmered but her tone stayed sharp. "You set us up." "No," I said. "You walked blindly into a system you never understood. And assumed I wouldn't either." Her shoulders slumped. "Please help us." I said nothing. There was nothing left to negotiate. The following day, the full sequence unfolded. Emails, letters, formal notices confirming the audit, and finally my lawyer's message sealing the process. They accessed the flagged account. Everything moved exactly as I had predicted. I stepped onto my balcony, letting the warm air wash over me. Below, the city hummed its indifferent rhythm. Behind me, the news replayed. My parents' voices drifted faintly through the glass. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had walked straight into the trap I had quietly prepared. I had done nothing but let them face the consequences of their own actions. Rain began that evening, soft against the railings. I stepped out, holding a mug to warm my hands. The city blurred through the mist, and the scent of wet asphalt filled the air, fresh and cleansing. My phone buzzed with updates, messages, inquiries. I let them sit. The world could continue without me for a while. On the table lay a photograph my father had sent months before. The three of us on a sunlit beach, My younger self perched on his shoulders. I traced the edges with my fingers, feeling the memory of a story that no longer belonged to me. Work continued steadily that week. I signed contracts, answered questions, moved through hallways with purpose instead of placeholder presence. Noah passed my desk, offering a quiet smile. That was enough. A letter waited in my mailbox. Grace's handwriting, uneven and unfamiliar, revealed that she had enrolled in a program for women rebuilding their finances. She didn't demand a reply, only quietly acknowledged the truth she had overlooked until now. I set it beside the old photograph and watched the rain streak the balcony glass. Later I drove to the coast. The same stretch of sand, the same tide from the photograph. The water curled around my ankles then receded. "I forgive you," I whispered to the wind. "Not for them but for me. Some boundaries don't need words. They exist the moment you refuse to return to the spaces that taught you to shrink." My family once assumed I would carry their mistakes forever. But the truth was simple. I didn't break the cycle. I simply stepped out of it. The ocean moved in calm, unbothered rhythms. I took a final breath of salt air, leaving the past behind as I walked back to my car.